Okay, Congressman, when I get the clearance from Jesse, I'll give you a quick countdown and then it's your show.
Go. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us at the annual conference for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. We are so grateful that you all joined us online, especially after so many had signed up to be with us in person. But as you know, due to the government shutdown, we've been denied our venue. So we've switched everything over with the good graces of Emma Sandifer from our staff, who managed to put this event along with our technology consultants 100% online. And we think we're in for an interesting and informative time, with many people having joined us and some still joining us still. I'm John Tierney. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, which many of you know is a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to enhancing peace and security through expert policy analysis, research, and education. Our mission is to seek to reduce the number of nuclear weapons arsenals, halt the spread of nuclear weapons, and minimize the risk of nuclear war and catastrophe by informing the public and policymakers. Today's program is going to feature remarks and panel discussions from respected experts, and we're grateful that they're with us. Our two panels are going to focus on, one, the concerns surrounding the impact of new technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, on nuclear policy weapons. And the second panel will talk about the need to reinforce the use of diplomacy as the foremost, and in fact, historically, the most successful means to avoid nuclear war. Moderating our first panel is Matthew Gault. We appreciate Matthew joining us. He's the contributing editor of 404 Media podcast and an Outrider Fellow covering the intersection of AI and nuclear weapons. As a writer, Mr. Gault has extensively covered technology and nuclear war. He, as a freelance writer, has worked for Reuters and the New York Times before taking on his current assignment. Matthew will provide brief remarks, and then we'll introduce his panelists, who are Dr. Jesse Kirkpatrick, Dr. Jacquelyn Schneider, and Dr. Cindy Vestergaard. Increasingly, we've noticed that international voices are advocating for safeguards and for prior testing of those safeguards before the release of technological products. Additionally, some are advocating for prohibitions on lethal autonomous weapons and self-replicating artificial intelligence as they seek to, and I quote, prevent universally unacceptable risks from artificial intelligence, as the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa recently told delegates at the United Nations in New York. Many also seek to ensure the control of artificial intelligence and the fact that it should not be left in the hands, they say, of only a few tech companies and countries. New York Times opinion columnist Thomas Friedman, writing for himself and his advisor Craig Mundy, who was the co-author of the AI primer Genesis, recently cautioned about the consequences of failure of the United States and China to unite to have internationally acceptable rules bounding artificial intelligence. He believes that the United States and China can compete on artificial intelligence while still collaborating on a shared level of trust that guarantees that artificial intelligence always remains aligned with human flourishing and planetary stability. Otherwise, they fear the risk of incompatible standards, mutual suspicions, and catastrophic failure through artificial intelligence, and that will lead to spiraling conflict, collapse, or unprecedented consequences. We can look forward to what our guests have to say. Matthew Gault, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful intro. I'm very happy to be here. Let me first thank the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation for putting this together. And second, let me thank the wonderful tech people and logistics people behind the scenes working to get us all online and looking our best on short notice. Isn't the future grand? Here we are all on this conference call, and we can keep working the problem of nuclear weapons despite losing our venue. The government shutdown cannot hold us back, and we can thank technology for that. But I think we all know also that a Zoom call is not quite as good as an in-person meeting. And a lot is lost when a signal changes from analog to digital. There is something to be said for trying to keep things as human as possible. And that's a theme of the panel today. Saying yes to Team Human in the face of overwhelming pressure, salesmanship, and not a little fear. We live in an age of technological miracle and wonder, and also horror, I think. Artificial intelligence in all of its varied forms is here. And I'm going to guess that everyone on the call has either played around with it or knows someone who has. And I'm not just talking about LLMs, those systems like ChatGPT and Claude that will have a conversation with you and act as a front end for much of the web. No, AI is doing a lot more. If you've had a document glanced over by spell check in the past few years, you've used an AI system. I'm pretty skeptical of a lot of this stuff, but I do use an AI transcription service. It has turned an 8-hour job to an 8-minute one. I can't argue with those results. But, of course, AI is not just helping us all with office work. The IDF is using it to pick targets in Gaza. Palantir has an AI system it says will collate battlefield data and help commanders make fast decisions in an active war zone. SOCOM just bought its first round of AI-controlled turrets. And so, inevitably, it comes up. This idea that is almost as old as nuclear weapons themselves. What happens when we mix AI and nukes? And there is, of course, that nightmare scenario, the one that is played out in countless works of fiction. A thinking machine weighs the outcomes and, having done the math, decides to push the nuclear button and end all life on Earth. It is a ludicrous proposition, automating apocalypse, but it is not as if no one is talking about it. If you go looking, you will find serious policy proposals from serious think tanks and serious pundits who believe that this is a good idea. And remember, perimeter exists. Dead hand and fail deadly systems are attractive to some. But I do ask that as we talk today and we go through this panel, that we all think smaller too. There are thousands of little ways that AI will be integrated into the world's nuclear weapons. It may be as simple as a machine learning system scanning repair reports in a Missouri missile silo and automatically ordering parts, or as grand as trading out wary human eyes on an early warning system for tireless algorithm-connected sensors. And I want us to remember our history as well. We have avoided nuclear war because we've been lucky, but also because we've been human. When a leader orders a nuclear strike, there are dozens of individual human beings that sit between that decision and the ultimate launch. Radar tech sees something odd, commanders relay orders, missileers turn keys. The responsibility is spread. And everyone here probably knows the stories. The multiple times we've come to the brink of nuclear war and stepped back because a human being decided not to do something. And this is the real danger of nuclear weapons at the dawn of AI, I think. We should worry less that AI will make a decision that will kill us all, and we should worry that, justified by efficiency, in the name of modernization, and in the pursuit of lucrative defense contracts, AI will replace the next Stanislav Petrov. And so we are here today to grapple with the specifics of this problem. We are here today to talk about what it means to keep a human in the loop. And I also want us to remember why we should keep a human in the loop. The stakes are high. And humans, for all of our myriad faults, have time and time again walked to the very brink and balked. Machines do not balk. So let me introduce to you the people who are going to help us grapple with this. We have Jesse Kirkpatrick, professor at George Mason University. He's here to walk us through the technical aspects of AI integration with nuclear command, control, and communication. Then we will go to Jacquelyn Schneider. She's the director of the Hoover Wargaming and Crisis Simulation Initiative at Stanford University. She's going to talk to us about the risks associated with incorporating AI in NC3. And then we will end by trying to answer the question, what do we do about all of this? And now it's a big question, but I know that Cindy Vestergaard will help us navigate it. She is the director of Converging Technologies and Global Security at the Stimson Center. Thank you all for being here. And with that, I will kick it to Jesse.
Thank you, Matthew. And thank you for everyone at the center for the invitation to speak here. It's both an honor and a privilege. So I'm going to talk today. I'm going to talk today about the technical dimensions of AI, and I really want to start by laying out what are kind of three drivers or logics for which people that want to integrate AI into NC3 and kind of argue. The first is that speed and decision superiority. So the promise here is that there's accelerated analysis and warning. The strategic logic is that allows the US or those who possess these capabilities to stay ahead of adversary timelines. The second is reliability and continuity. That is, that autonomous and AI systems will allow the US to maintain resilience under stress. It maintains deterrent credibility. And the third is complexity management, right? Is that the world is a complex place. Pattern recognition across data layers is the promise here, and it allows the notion of kind of controlling the uncontrollable. So I'm going to talk about some of the technical reasons why AI doesn't just make nuclear command decisions faster, but it actually makes them more brittle. So let's start with speed and decision superiority. So, okay, as I mentioned, AI promises to accelerate analysis, decompress decision timelines, maintain deterrence by ensuring that warning systems stay ahead of potential adversaries. AI systems learn from historical data. They perform really, really well on events that are typical, but they struggle with kind of rare, high-impact anomalies, and these are the kind of situations that dominate nuclear warning and nuclear warfare. We call this out of distribution, that is, conditions beyond which the model has seen before. So in NC3, we have perception pipelines, and these draw on autonomous infrared, they draw on radar, optical sensors. We have things like weather, obscuration, solar interference, sensor degradation that can push the data beyond the bounds for which the system's been trained. And so the result here is that we have an AI system that may generate confident but catastrophically wrong inferences. So let me give you a quick kind of real world example of this. 2018 in Tempe, Arizona. You may have heard this story before, right? It's the story of an Uber self-driving vehicle strikes a pedestrian. The pedestrian's walking a bicycle at night. And the perception module in the self-driving car kept reclassifying the object. So it says it's a vehicle, 1/2 a second to bicycle, then a pedestrian. It kind of toggles between these three, but never with enough confidence to trigger the system to brake. And the result really here is that a combination and maybe some isolated factors of kind of low light, motion blur, not really being able, not having seen perhaps someone pushing a bicycle with the posture in which they were, right? All of these were outside the training distribution of this system. And so the system was really confidently wrong until impact. It just was out of the distribution. It was as if it had never seen such a thing before. All right, so the same vulnerability exists in AI-enabled systems with NC3. Let's take early warning systems. So we may have something like a solar flare, atmospheric reflection. These could all be misread as a launch event. And they could propagate through the automated alert chains in milliseconds. Right? And as Matthew mentioned, these humans once caught these anomalies, and autonomous systems may not. So let's get to the second, reliability and continuity. Right? So AI and autonomy are also pursued to make NC3 more reliable, to ensure continuity under attack or degraded conditions. But resilience through autonomy can become escalation by default when human judgment's removed from the loop. So let me give you another example. This is the 2021 Bitcoin flash crash. So there was no macro event that caused this. What resulted in was automatic training bots reacted to each other. So one platform sell-off triggers liquidations on others, cascades until literally billions in value are evaporated. This is a decade after the old school crash, which was this 2010 flash crash, but we've seen the same kind of structural fragility behind the tech. And that's autonomous agents amplifying noise into crisis while human oversight lags. Just didn't have the capacity to keep up. Now, in a nuclear context, we can imagine a self-reinforcing anomaly across radar, infrared feeds could mirror the same pattern, right? A kind of flash crash for nuclear. Now, let me give you the third before I turn to what I think are some important technical solutions. So the third, remember, is complexity management, all right? And so this is the final promise that integrating AI into NC3 is going to help manage and reduce complexity. And it's going to find patterns that humans would just quite simply miss, right? But there's this real kind of deep epistemic risk that lies here, a kind of fancy way of saying about how we know stuff, right? And the thing is that AI seems kind of like a magic box, or it seems to work really well, and in some cases it does, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't reason. Right? It finds correlations, it finds patterns, it calculates statistical probabilities. So it can be precise, it can be persuasive, and it can be completely wrong in a way that looks like it's completely right. Now, in the end, what we end up with are these kind of deep learning systems that are more or less kind of opaque. So as I mentioned, they output probabilities, not understanding. They can hallucinate, which you may have heard is that they're confident but false facts because they model likelihood and not truth. So in perception systems, again, right, we're thinking about sensors and systems that perceive the world. This probabilistic opacity can really run the risk of what we call emergent behavior, all right? An emergent behavior is this behavior that emerges in a system, and kind of a few different things happen. So let me give you the example of phantom braking in self-driving cars, right? This is a known problem with AI, one that we haven't yet found a solution to, and one that really poses a risk of introducing it into any safety critical system, let alone nuclear. All right, so phantom braking. So no single causal variable explains it, right? We have a bunch of these sensors that exist in these cars. It's like LiDAR, radar, computer vision. And you can imagine that they produce inconsistent signals. Radar might detect an overpass, vision sees an open road. Each subsystem in and of itself locally behaves correctly. When you put them into a complex system, the system breaks anyways. In this case, phantom brakes, like the car just stops for no reason. So it's a property of the system, not a single model. And here's where there's this irony about thinking about reducing complexity, is that we have a very complex system that is designed to reduce complexity, but as a result of behaviors maybe from one small part of the system, it might even be a pixel in an image, we end up with these catastrophic kind of problems that can go wrong. Right. And so how does this kind of emergent failure mode, such as phantom braking, like why does it matter for nuclear? Right. Okay. So one is that perception systems could just see a pattern, a reflected plume, a sensor echo, whatever the case may be. It could sense something that triggers an autonomous escalation cascade, similar to what I described with the flash crash. Right? Just one little thing can link up to a catastrophic failure. And so these no one single component kind of fails on its own, but when put into combination, their coupling produces this failure, right? And that's going to happen too fast for human correction. All right, so this is like the paradox of complexity management. The more we rely on AI to control it, the more that we can fail to manage the complexity that it creates. All right, so those are kind of three issues, right? That we have these three drivers, and then we have these promises and three hidden risks, right? Speed is that the AI system is brittle. Reliability and continuity is that we have these unintended escalations. And then finally, complexity management is that we might fail to account for emergent instability. All right, so in the final minute that I have, I want to tell you what we can do about this. Right, I want to link here technical guardrails to policy. So first, hard code human judgment. Right, I think that no autonomy at present we should, and maybe never have no autonomous launch authority. Codify that in doctrine, not just policy. Design for friction, multi-purpose, multi-person authentication and deliberate pause points throughout the system preserve accountability. If I have to have two-factor authentication on my phone, it should be in a system so critical as this. Institutionalized testing, evaluation, verification, and validation for nuclear AI all throughout the system, right? So testing is super important. Build fail-self by design architectures. This is the third, right? So require cross-validation, right? Redundancies and sensors and radar, infrared, and optical. It's going to be more expensive at the outset, but cheaper in the long run. All right. Last but not least, before I close, develop international AI risk norms. Right? This is crucial. So here's 3 things that we can do there. Expand hotlines and risk reduction centers for real-time anomaly sharing, right? Share the data when things go wrong. Conduct joint simulations and cooperative exercises when it comes to testing and evaluation. Embed AI testing standards in future arms control frameworks to balance innovation with transparency. So one final thought here before I turn it over to Matthew is that I really think that an AI action plan, right, is that, as we've been talking, requires not only complex policies, but it also really, really needs to be an engineering plan as well. So thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Let's kick it over to Jackie to keep the NC3 and AI risk conversation going.
Well, thanks for having me. Too bad we're virtual, but also wonderful that we have these virtual interfaces to step in when the government shuts down. So what I want to do today is kind of ground this conversation as much as I can in data and what we who have been kind of sitting back researching from literally the ivory tower behind me, what we're finding about where these dangers occur and what we need to worry about. So I want to talk about some of the research we've been doing through war games. And then I want to say I want to take that research and apply it directly to 3 elements of the nuclear enterprise and talk about, should we be as worried as we are, and are we worried about the right things? So, I think Matthew led our panel with a really great introduction that lays out the concerns about keeping the human in the loop when it comes to the use of nuclear weapons. And actually, that is such a resoundingly logical assertion that even President Biden, former President Biden, and Xi Jinping agreed that they both think that that's a good idea. But the devil is in the details, because there's a far more complicated relationship between AI and nuclear use than just the statement that we need to keep the human in the loop. So let me start a little bit about what my research suggests, and then let's apply that to a few portions of the nuclear launch process. Okay. So what have we been doing here at Hoover? So I run war games to help us understand how emerging technologies affect things like strategic stability. So we have a game series that looks at like AI gone awry and how an AI-enabled weapon system, how will our players choose to use it, and then how that affects the crisis escalation in a notional US-China scenario. I've also worked with researchers at the HAI, which is a human AI center here at Stanford, where they really led the project looking across different LLMs in a crisis scenario to see which ones escalated, which ones de-escalated. And then finally, I looked at cybersecurity and vulnerabilities. And these 3 wargaming research projects revealed a few things. The first is, if you let AI models iterate, if you give them a lot of room to make decisions, if you tell them that you you can talk as a group and you let them talk for longer and longer and longer, the longer the leash, the more tendency towards escalation. In the research project that compared different chatty or large language models, we found that even the large language models that were built with significant guardrails, if you play the scenario long enough, they will tend towards escalation. And another research project where we compared LLMs to human behavior, what we found was that on the baseline, if we let the LLM only have a very short discussion amongst itself, it performs very similarly as the median human player. However, the longer you let it speak to itself, the longer you make it simulate group dynamics, the more likely it is to move towards escalation. And finally, my research on cybersecurity, which was not about a war game about AI, revealed the real incentives that states might have to automate despite these dangers. So in that war game, we introduced a vulnerability into nuclear command control and communications. And we told players, what are you going to do about it? And this was not a game about AI, but for the players that received the vulnerability, a significant amount of them chose to solve the vulnerability by automating and turning to artificial intelligence to serve as a kind of backup dead hand. So those games reveal both kind of a tendency towards escalation within existing LLMs and a real incentive to use AI as a backup when there is a significant threat to our ability to control nuclear launches. That sounds really scary. But I think we can break this problem down even more granularly. And what I want you to take away from the rest of my talk is that AI, as it is currently operating, can closely mimic human behavior, and yet displays significant bias. And according to my research, a lot of that bias moves towards escalation. Despite the fact that there are significant problems, there are real scenarios in which, even if we know there is bias, there may be incentives or pressures to automate, even within the nuclear decision making. So let's start with the worst case scenario. And I think this is the scenario that everyone agrees there should not be an AI that makes the decision. And that's the final decision to launch. So what does that look like? That is the moment at which the operator is looking at the problem and asking the executive to say, should we use nuclear weapons or not? And this is, I think, what a lot of the doom and gloom scenarios come to. They say, oh, okay, this is the worst case scenario. And if there's not a kind of human who is making that final decision, we need to make sure that they're not going to tend towards artificial intelligence to serve as kind of the automated dead hand. The good news, I think, that I have for you is that that is not something that we generally see states moving towards. Both the Chinese governments and the US government seem to be very clear that that final decision needs to be the executive. The one exception there is if they're in a situation where they feel like there might be a threat that would enable them to not, that wouldn't allow them to control their nuclear forces. And so building arms control or mutual trust in order to convince states that you're never going to be in that situation where you lose control, where we actively target your ability to control nuclear forces. And really, these are the same debates that we were having before AI about nuclear stability and the preservation of the ability to control that second strike capability. So I'm not going to say I dismiss this, the big worst case scenario, but I think it's probably the least likely. So where are we going to see real difficulty in disengaging AI? Well, I think that's in two places. One is early warning. So early warning used to be a relatively simplistic set of sensors. You had a limited amount of sensors that provided you some information about when there were launches. Now, early warning is, a mixture of sensors. It's probably more sensors than any one person could completely understand. And therefore, there is already some element of machine learning that is processing those sensors, that calculates the certainty and the uncertainty of the sensor, and that is then taking that assumption and using it in a model to tell the viewer or the user that there is this threat or there is not this threat. Now, I always tell people an example of how this worked for me in my real life, because back in the 20 years ago and the beginnings of the internet, I was a intelligence officer sitting in South Korea, and it was my sole job to call the general if the North Koreans were going to go south. Now, this is kind of back in the early days. We didn't have that many sensors. So if I saw that there was a problem on the common operating picture, I had an understanding of, oh, it's this time of day. There might be this error with the sensor. So I could interrogate the data. And by interrogating the data, I had a graceful degradation of the truth. The problem that we have as we move towards more AI-enabled early warning is that the user doesn't necessarily have that ability to interrogate the truth behind artificial intelligence. There are too many sensors. The model is too complicated. And that leads to a few incentives for both accidental and inadvertent escalation. The first is if another state believes it's beneficial for them to manipulate some of that sensor information or to manipulate the algorithm. And they might not be even thinking that they're messing with a nuclear algorithm or a nuclear sensor, because so many of the sensors that we now use in early warning are part of both our conventional early warning and our nuclear early warning. And the other problem that you have is you basically have users that either trust the information completely, and therefore when there are hallucinations or issues of bias within the underlying algorithm and the underlying kind of data that the AI has been trained on, they're not able to interrogate it. And so they either trust everything or they trust nothing. And so that's a very large onus of responsibility to place on individuals that are reliant on AI-enabled early warning. But it is impossible. I don't think that like President Biden or Xi Jinping would have agreed that there shouldn't be AI in early warning. And so here is where I think you start seeing that there are potential dangers, even if we all think that AI should not be part of the way we launch nuclear weapons, that there are still going to be incentives and real dangers that we are not able to completely extricate ourselves from. And that leads to the second and kind of final case I want to talk about, which is the use of artificial intelligence for targeting nuclear capabilities. So that could be a second strike or a first strike. And here, once again, we have the problem where there are potential biases and potential hallucinations that are built into the algorithm, which is finding submarines or finding mobile missile sites. And so you have very limited ability to test whether your algorithm is biased, because this is not something that can be exercised. This is something that's happening real time. During the Cold War, what they found was that these models sometimes biased towards creating the largest effects possible. So if you let the algorithm learn itself, there is a possibility that it optimizes on what is kind of the rational win set, which is destroying the most instead of some sort of kind of controlled escalation. And so these are just examples of where AI is already integrated or is a part of the nuclear enterprise, and yet it's not that worst case scenario that we often talk about. So with that, I'd love to kind of hear the solutions from Cindy.
I think that's a better intro than I could give her. So let's cut to Cindy.
Thank you. Well, we'll see. So I'm going to come at this. First of all, thank you, of course, all, and to the esteemed panelists. I'm going to try to interject a little bit of funness, oddly, to verification in looking at the nuclear side of things from the civilian energy side of things, and how we are seeing AI being used, and then what that means for the International Atomic Energy Agency and their job in inspecting and making sure that nuclear activities remain peaceful. So as has already been mentioned, and I like the idea of the I'm not going to say it right, Jesse, the complexity management. There it is. And particularly look in the digesting and analysis of these vast amounts of data that is the 80 years of nuclear age, and the potential for AI, of course, to help mainstream that. And not just, Matt, as you were saying, Matthew, in terms of your scripts that get spat out from your interviews, but also looking at the mass volumes that are needed for licensing applications. And I think here, though, and we're seeing more and more looking at document retrieval, search bots. We have a few, chat OPG, for example, in Ontario Power Generation, they have their own chat bot. But generally what we're seeing is very much at the pilot stage. The nuclear sector is a very conservative one, and rightly so. We talk a lot about an accident in one place is an accident everywhere. Everybody gets affected. And then of course also the nuclear regulators across the globe will look at this with skepticism, because it is a very, uranium is the most regulated rock in the world for a reason, right? But I think it's important when we're looking at AI and the pilot examples that are out there, and the potential use cases, and the more pilot that are in the pipeline for the nuclear energy sector. The predictive maintenance, detecting anomalies, what that means for predictive maintenance, for example. And again, coming back to the cost efficiencies and the effectiveness of data retrieval and data access. But one of the things that's very maybe cross purposes, maybe that's the wrong word, but that is a challenge in adopting AI in the nuclear sector, is that the nuclear sector is very file-based, and AI is data. So a lot of the nuclear sector is unstructured data. So you have to be able to structure it to be able for it to mean anything when it comes to data analysis and retrieval, of course, as well. And this is something that the IAEA has expressed when it comes, or mentioned in its report from its emerging tech workshop that took place earlier this year in January. It focused specifically on AI. It was its third emerging tech workshop. And what's interesting there is, if we're looking at the IAEA, there's a lot of cameras globally that it uses for its containment and surveillance systems. But these cameras are not the same as your phone camera. These are cameras that take pictures every 20 seconds, 30 seconds, couple minutes. It depends on the camera. It depends on the agreement that the IAEA has with the state. So AI, it can't be 24/7, if you will, when it comes to those surveillance or those pictures. But at the same time, we're talking about lots of images, vast amounts of images, and then being able to look for those anomalies. And why did material move? It wasn't supposed to move. The other thing that the IAEA certainly underscores is the inherent hallucinations that come in AI. And as someone who uses, right now, I'm playing around with AI for a number of different avatar videos, mostly for demonstration effect. They never stick to the script, ever, in any of the scripts that I put forward. And I put in there, do not deviate from the script. And it can be very kind. Sorry, I apologize. You're right. This shouldn't have happened. And then one even told me, I can't fix it. So, this in of itself, if just generating a video is a 3-minute based on a script, what does this mean for potential for hallucinations in other aspects, of course, in retrieving files or generating fake or incorrect data? Human in the loop, nothing about our verification of peaceful activities in the nuclear space in any way takes away from the human need. We need humans to go in and eyeball how many spent fuel rods are there in this facility. How many are the workers are here that they said that they are. And are the lights on, right? Are the basic aspects, of course. And I think here too that, this is where humans come in, and I'm not saying that we should go on gut when it comes to a lot of things. Obviously in inspection, it all is about facts, but inspectors who are well trained do have a gut reaction. And as you mentioned, Matthew, in an opening up, whether we're talking about automating apocalypse, humans have emotions. Humans have reasoning. And so this is where I think, again, as you mentioned, a lot of the examples that have kept us, thankfully, humans in the loop have kept us safe, because they're like, something's not right. And the data that I'm seeing isn't right. So I think this is where, when we're looking at the potential for IAEA to use AI, certainly there is potential, but we have a long way to go for testing, demonstration, testing again, certification. Just instruments that are used by the IAEA can take 7 to 10 years for certification, and that's okay. I think that there's an urgency. We must use AI. We must use AI. And that is being told to us from the operators and also the regulators. There's this huge push and urgency. We must use AI. But how do you do that if you're an operator and one AI company might dissolve within 3 days after you've tested the platform? And so there's a variety of different, of course, risk assessments that need to be done at the same time as they are looking at AI. And AI is evolving. So this is another thing that the IAEA has put forward, that a lot of the models that might be in place today might shift and change over time. So of course, there's also a workforce skill set that needs to be done. So I will end on that and look at, the potential for AI nuclear safeguards for creating greater efficiencies, and see what that means in terms of the discussion going forward.
Thank you so much. We're going to get into some questions from me, and we're going to take some questions from the audience. I've already got a couple come in that are pretty good. If you'll will keep them coming, and I will ask. First, Jackie, for you, I wanted to know the games that you played with the LLMs. Were they just like off the shelf, out of the box, like ChatGPT models, or did you do any kind of training with anything discrete or of those models before you ran the games?
Okay, great question. So the game that compared different LLMs, those were different LLMs. So they all ran the same, they all were in the same scenarios, but these are, distinct separate LLMs. For the one that we compared directly to human play, that was ChatGPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4.0. So we compared the two. Now, we ran those, and I really want to credit my co-authors here, because my co-authors are the real geniuses in this. That's Max Lamparth. He's the one who ran all of these models, but he's the one who experimented with how the group was designed. He was the one who experimented with how long the group was able to iterate. He experimented with whether the group was told to play roles. So we give human players, roles in the game, like, SecDef and Secretary of State. And in the human games, actually, the rules don't really seem to matter. It doesn't really drive how they play. But it was interesting in the LLM, when you give them roles, does that change the way they play? He also took straight demographics from some of the groups that played on the human, and then recreated those demographics within the chat agents. So you're basically trying to recreate as much as possible the demographic variables of a true group that is playing. So all of those are manipulations. And then he also manipulated, how long it can iterate on itself before it makes a decision. So those are all, manipulations and changes. And that's all Max. Max is the genius here, Max Lamparth, my co-author who I work with at Stanford.
Then kind of bridging off of that, and Jesse, I'm wondering Jesse, if you're wondering if you would also weigh in on this, what would ideal training data look like for NC3 AI systems? Is that something that's even possible or good? Is there enough in the world? How would you even make such a thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't think there's I don't think there's enough. I think that I think what you would need. So a few different things. One is like size and scale, right? Is there enough data? And if we're talking about sort of AI training, the type of model that we would be training would be, say, on the order of even a small model, generative AI kind of LLM, a mini model requires a huge amount of training data, right? Now it depends on I think, a few different factors. What part of NC3 are we talking about training on? So I think Jackie raised a really good point, which is that we have, 15 different types of, I mean, roughly 15, 20 different types of sensor arrays in which we can get environmental data. So there's rich data when it comes to sensor inputs, for example, right? So that would include environmental data, acoustical data, weather data, plumes of missile plumes. There's a whole range of different types of data. And so for some of that, it would need to be consistent, clean, orderly, and structured well, as Cindy mentioned, right? You need sort of uniform data. You need it on a scale that is big enough that we can find patterns and distributions. And so I think that what I want to answer here is that the real kind of rub is that the availability and quality of data when it comes to NC3 is rather uneven, right? So we're going to have rich data in the way that I said from these sensor arrays, but maybe not the type of data that we want when it comes to, say, human decision making.
Jesse, would you say, since you're the technical expert, I keep imagining, it's not only that there's not a lot of data, but that you might have been training the data incorrectly the whole time, right? So if this is, let's say we're looking for missiles, right? And I have trained the data that, the way this looks in the image, that's a missile. And I think it is, but I'm wrong, right? And because this is, classified imagery, it's not like Google Earth, where we're able to validate whether I have classified it correctly. Is it possible that we could build both early warning and targeting that we meant to be unbiased, but we have inadvertently just trained it poorly?
Confirmation bias machines.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a possibility that if, of course, like kind of any system, if I were going to be teaching my students to a test that's wrong, right, with information that's wrong, I teach them that 2 + 3 is 6. When they go to take that test, they're going to be factually, empirically incorrect. There are other issues, of course, so one is kind of what computer scientists call kind of garbage in, garbage out, right? It's the quality of that data, the training. In this case, it would be the annotation, right? It'd be the analyst annotation where you, hypothetically, not you, Jackie, but you hypothetically, or one hypothetically, is labeling data that it is, that it is a missile, a duck, or a car, and getting that wrong, then the machine is going to learn incorrectly. That's certainly the case. The other is that, there could be data that becomes outdated, right? And that it is, for example, training on data that is insufficiently updated with regard to, say, location or kind of ordnance type might be another, right? So there are lots of issues with size, scale, and quality and type, I would say. That's a great point.
My first thought, Jackie, when you said that, was the National Monument.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Cindy, how are you thinking about, what are the conversations like around another aspect of this that we haven't really gotten into, AI-generated disinformation, and how that might lead to escalation or something unpleasant happen? I'm thinking about, like, we're having this conversation like 7 days after the launch of Sora 2, which has created some pretty shockingly realistic AI videos that I would not even a year ago have imagined these systems are able to create.
It's a good point, and one of the things that I want to talk about, and I didn't in my opening remarks, was the G7-led global partnership against the spread of weapons and materials of mass destruction, or the G7GP, and they've been working a lot on disinformation and looking at understanding the trends, of course, and the threats and risks going forward. I think it's important here just to mention a few. Really talking about horror, scary facts. I mean, deep fake attacks surged by 1,000% from 2023 to 2024. So we don't even have the figures yet, or maybe they're out there now around this time. They usually come out in the fall, sometimes, of course, more in November, December, about the different attacks that we're seeing. But also by 2024, digital forgeries surpassed physical forgeries for the first time in our history. And if we're looking at the nuclear sector, I mean, there's been a long-standing concern about counterfeit parts. And then we start looking at the convergence of technology, where we have AI and additive manufacturing. Yes, great for printing, for example, inspectors need parts in the field, but what does that mean for counterfeit parts as well, too? What if centrifuges start spinning in a way that they shouldn't because they've been programmed in malign ways? Or even in mistaken ways, potentially by AI. So yes, the deep fakes and the disinformation side of things with Fukushima as well. I mean, I know that's already a long, 14 years ago, but there as well. I mean, misinformation and disinformation propaganda is not a new thing in the nuclear sector. But with Fukushima, there was a lot of fake pictures and doctored pictures that were put up. So now we've got more blood reel-like movements and faces that AI is doing. We have, I mean, the mouths are still off, the hands are still doing the thing. And as I said, they're not sticking to the script. But disinformation in this sector is something that the Global Partnership Program is looking at as an initiative. There's a lot of money that's going into this, maybe not enough, you could argue. But certainly in looking at this and what does it mean if you are trying to do threat reduction as we're moving from an industry 3.0 to an industry 4.0 world, where our physical and digital lives are starting to become more merged. And our reality is becoming blurred from that virtual world to the physical world. So I think it's important that that countries are looking at this from a threat reduction perspective and what it means for them in being able to navigate that in an AI-driven world.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to switch over to stuff from the audience. This one's for Jackie. I was very interested to hear about a previous life sitting and watching the border and kind of being engaged with these early warning systems. And I'm wondering, looking back on that experience, do you think that any kind of AI would have been helpful for you in that work from like that perspective, from being the person on the ground?
Oh, and that's a tough one because the North was never going south. So, in this case, like we were good. Um, you know, I think we knew at the time where there were things that we just possibly wouldn't have awareness of on, the common operating picture. And would that be helpful, right? Like if you had enough sensors and ability to integrate that, that data with AI, wouldn't you want to know where like China was hiding all of its missiles, or when they moved them, or where the nuclear submarines were? I think any decision maker would say you absolutely want more of that data so that you can make better decisions. I think that's been the drive towards these large data sets that are enabled by machine learning, but are driving towards artificial intelligence. I think it's that. So yes, I want it, right? Like AI would make that better. And there's actually great research into how AI might be able to help with verification, and therefore lead potentially to better arms control, kind of like AI open skies, right? I think that's when you have to balance it with, and there are also real vulnerabilities that come with being too dependent or confident. The overconfidence, I think, is a word that I keep hearing from the other panelists. Too overconfident in AI's ability to give you what is truly happening in the world.
Yeah, there's this tendency to, for whatever reason, look at the outputs of AI and say that's good enough in a way that is not the same as the stories we hear when people looked at early warning systems and said, like, I'm going to double check that. All right, let's jump into some audience questions. The first that I've got here, and thank you all for being patient, is from Kate. Do we have data on how imminent the removal of human oversight in nuclear weapons decisions is, as opposed to founded fears based on these examples just shared? And whoever wants to jump.
I mean, look, I don't know, right? I'm just going to surmise. I don't have data. I don't see a drive towards using AI to make the nuclear decision. I just have not sat in a meeting with anyone who said, I really want that. I do see a drive towards AI for general situational awareness. And there's already, I think AI is far further integrated when it comes to intelligence, at least for the United States, than it is operations. So the AI cat is kind of already out of the bag when it comes to intelligence. And I don't think that's just the United States. I think that if you have the capability, you are doing that. And the question is kind of how far along that is in operations. And there, I think I'd love to hear my panelists, but I'm not sure kind of what I am slightly confident about what the US is doing and zero confidence about what China is doing.
Yeah, if anyone else has any data or anecdotes or whatever, please share. All right, I'm going to jump on to the next one then, which kind of dovetails quite nicely. Um, my understanding is that AI is not currently directly being integrated into existing NC3 systems because, in part, of the antiquated legacy systems that NC3 represents. Is this correct? And if not, what companies are doing this in the nuclear area? So old systems can't run modern software.
Oh,
I think at some point someone needs to share, and maybe Cindy, you were about to do this, like the slide that shows that the NC3 is a whole lot of things. Like, it's hard when we use NC3 as if it's like one network or even one set of networks. It is the way all these things are connected. And so there are elements of command and control uh, and communications that are antiquated, that operate in analog or kind of early digital ways. However, there are also portions of NC3 that are digital and that ride on a backbone of data. So I think there are portions of this decision making that will probably never have the technological capability to be something that is AI. But there are definitely portions that do have that potential. And I think that's more, like I was mentioning before, that's going to be more on intelligence and less on operations. So how do we get early warning, and how do we think about building, targeting, whether it's a first or second strike?
And also, I mean, NC3 has been using AI already, but in very, very, very early models, right? And I think this is also an important point where tried and tested for decades. And just inserting in a new algorithm isn't something that I think we're going to see anytime soon. Just to reiterate that yes, there's already been machine learning in NC3, but as to Jackie's point, there are, and also what Jesse mentioned in terms of the complexity management that's there, and also just looking at civilian energy, they're not using it yet. We're still very much at the pilot stage. So jumping from that to thinking that where the floppy disk in a silo is now going to be replaced the next day with some kind of generative AI is a leap way too far in our in both the weapons and the civilian sector.
But I would also just caveat that with saying that the leaders talk about it like they want it, and not just civilian leaders, but also military leaders. There's the Air Force General Anthony Cotton speech from last year, I believe, almost a year ago, I think now, where he said that, Strategic Air Command needs AI at all these different levels. Of course, like it is going to be used for a lot of basic things and small things, but this is stuff that's being pursued. And as the panelists have all said, NC3 is very complicated and very big. And it is not just floppy disks anymore. Although I think they've They finally got rid of the floppy disks a few years ago, if I recall correctly.
Maybe
All
not in
right.
every country.
I'm sorry, what?
Maybe not in every country.
Fair enough. Maybe not in every country, but there's now we've got room to upgrade. Who knows? All right, let's take one more, and then I will kick this back over to Jon. Um, Cindy, this is for you, I think. How do you envision AI's role in the future of international diplomacy, and what are we doing to strengthen this?
Wow, that's an interesting one. International diplomacy and AI. Is that more of, using AI as a diplomatic tool or
That's
having conversations about,
that's
uh,
how I read it. AI
right.
is a diplomatic tool.
I I think our chat bots need to be more tried and tested over time for something like that. I think I mean, we all have anecdotes, whether you're in Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini. I mean, there's so many different kinds now, and I'm finding them each offer different hallucinations, each offer different opportunities and efficiencies in many ways. And I always suggest to my colleagues and certainly also my research assistants to use a variety of different ones so that they can get a feel for how they are. Yeah, diplomacy. I mean, in today's world, and I take Jackie's point too. I don't know if we've done tabletop exercises on diplomacy and AI, but I would be curious about the escalation effect there. Talking also to, if I can make maybe a little bit of a joke on this, but talking to Jackie's point on the longer they talk, well, diplomats love to talk. So what does that mean for escalation with AI if we were to have our chat bots just keep talking and talking and talking? Yeah, in terms of the international diplomacy side, I think that's a question to be talked about for a while, but I don't think we have avatar ambassadors yet that need to start negotiating treaties. But maybe that would be an interesting tabletop exercise, Jackie. We can put this out there as a war game, maybe a diplomatic game where we have avatar diplomats who are negotiating an AI treaty. What do they come up with?
Matthew, could I just add one additional thought? Actually, two additional thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not steering the ship. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think the first again is like thinking of just like sort of the more mundane uses of AI, their LLMs in particular in diplomacy. So drafting memos more quickly, more policy documents, emails for communications, kind of the sort of the grist of the mill of diplomacy. There are problems with that, of course, uneven applications, uses and outputs and so on and so forth. But I think it's like the less than sexy parts are, where we're really going to, at least it's a hypothesis where it could speed up potential diplomacy making. The other is, and I do want to kind of put in a plug for what's near and dear to my heart is responsible AI. It's where a lot of my work is thinking about policy with respect to responsible AI, whether we think of it as AI trust or AI safety or AI whatever. I think that actually so this is kind of the other side of diplomacy, which is using, whether it's policy or regulation or harmonization of standards, whatever the case may be, when it comes to AI as a tool of diplomacy as opposed to division, right? And there are active international efforts, some of which have, cold water has been thrown on it since January, but there are some in which the US has been, very involved, AI safety institutes and so on and so forth that I think are, really could be used as a tool of diplomacy. So AI diplomacy and kind of the other kind of basket.
All right. I think that is our time. Cindy, Jesse, Jackie, thank you so much all for coming on and having this discussion with me. It was absolutely wonderful. I will kick things back over to Jon.
You are muted. Congressman, you're muted.
Jon, you're muted. I'm going to come in and jump in.
panelist and moderator on that. Very enlightening and very engaging. I would think that the only problem is we're not going to invite you to any Halloween parties up here in the Massachusetts on that, because people will leave very scared and very concerned and probably not sleep that night from other than the ghosts and ghouls and goblins on that. But it was very engaging and very enlightening, and we appreciate it a great deal. We see our next panelists populating, and we're happy to have them on. To those of you that were kind enough to submit questions, we appreciate that. If we didn't get to your question, know that we will try to get answers to that as soon as possible, and don't hesitate at all to engage and follow up with us to pursue an answer that you must have and you must want. Something I was supposed to mention I didn't earlier on was a little housekeeping, that anybody that's watching should feel free to share their insights on our social media. All you have to do is use the hashtag CACNP 2025. Our team will be live posting on Twitter and Blue Sky, and you can certainly be found the center on the handle Nukes of Hazard, and hopefully that's useful and helpful to people. Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our next speaker, who is Representative Don Beyer. It's a great pleasure to introduce him. He's serving in his 5th term, representing the 8th Congressional District of Virginia. He is obviously a district that encompasses Arlington, Alexandria, Falls Church, parts of Fairfax County. But we know Representative Beyer best as a member of the House and Senate Joint Economic Committee on Economics, as well as a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. But more so and relevant to what we're talking about, he continues to be and has been a champion on nuclear weapons policy issues, and he's a leader there. In 2021, he, with 3 other members of the House and Senate, formed the Congressional Nuclear Weapons and Arms Control Working Group. That working group has injected much needed oversight into the United States nuclear weapons modernization efforts, and it continues to push Congress to remain active on arms control and non-proliferation. Congressman, it's an honor to hear your comments, and we look forward to hearing them.
John, thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be with you, and Congressman, I'm sorry I didn't overlap with you. I think you left the day I came.
Right, exactly.
But I got thrown off the Council of the Livable World board the day I came. So I'm thrilled to be able to sort of circle back and still be a small part of all the good work you do. And John, before discussing AI and non-proliferation, I want to talk just briefly about the national security landscape here in the United States. And it really starts with the shutdown of the federal government. It's indicative of the dysfunction and the toxic political environment that's paralyzed our government in recent years, and really was exaggerating all our external challenges. Look, we hear every day, I represent Northern Virginia. We've got thousands and thousands of federal employees and contractors. Many of my constituents are losing their pay as early as this week. And I'm particularly concerned about the many individuals who support our national defense at DoD, at state, at other agencies, and all the private sector contractors who aren't going to get paid. So I confess I'm really deeply disappointed that the president and my Republican colleagues have been unwilling to govern responsibly, unwilling to come to the negotiating table. And then there's this campaign to export the conservative culture war into the Department of Defense, what Pete Hegseth now calls the Department of War. This is a frightening development that could lead to devastating long-term consequences for our nation and the world. And it really, as we saw in Quantico last week, it represents how deeply incompetent and unprepared the Trump team is for national security. And when Hegseth put all those generals and admirals together at Marine Corps Base Quantico to listen to this lecture on fitness standards and anti-woke rhetoric, you know, my dad was West Point career Army. You know, I miss him, but I'm glad he wasn't alive to see this waste of the general's time and this mention of national security vulnerability. I keep imagining what our commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, would have to do with even one push-up, much less exercising every day. And then the deployment of the National Guard to Democratic U.S. cities, exaggerating what's happening in Portland or Chicago, essentially Trump declaring war on blue America. This is, you know, the American people don't like it. I think it's terrible to target law-abiding and hardworking immigrants and supporting racial profiling of American citizens. No one wants the demonstration of a police state. At a minimum, it's a waste of taxpayer resources. And there are actual problems that we're pulling federal resources away from for this dog and pony show. I'm heartened that Oregon, Illinois, California, and others have pursued the legal action to stop this, but where it goes is anyone's guess. I listen all day to people that have the most catastrophic visions of what's to come. I hope not, but let me shift to something more cheerful, which is AI. Look, Congress, I've been part of the AI caucus ever since I came, but largely it was irrelevant until ChatGPT 3 hit. And then the AI Intelligence Caucus, which I now co-chair with Mike McCall and Jay Obernolte, Republicans, and Doris Matsui, Democrat. We spent a lot of time in the last couple of years trying to dive deep. We now have 96 members in the caucus. We had 100 AI-related bills last term. Speaker Mike Johnson and leader Hakeem Jeffries appointed an AI task force last year, led by Obernolte and Ted Lieu. I got to be part of it, 12 Dems, 12 Republicans. Really good report. If you have time to read all 270 pages, all bipartisan, 89 policy recommendations. So far, we've only passed like one bill. This is the Take It Down Act, which combated non-consensual sexual imagery, including especially AI-generated images. So the law now makes it a federal crime to post such images without consent, and it forces the platforms to take them down within 48 hours once they're reported. It was very bipartisan. It's only a first step because there's much, much more that we need to do. Biden came out with the AI executive order. It was the largest executive order in American history. Trump's repealed the Biden one, put in a new one. The good news is it's largely redundant. And probably the most important redundancy was keeping the Safety Institute at NIST, at the National Institute for Standards and Technology. They renamed it. It's now called CASE, but it's still out there trying to protect us and think long-term about it. I'm excited about AI because it deals with a problem that's ever deeper every year, which is so much more information and our inability to see the patterns, the correlations, the causations within it. AI gives us the ability to dramatically reduce the time and effort to review this massive volumes of data and actually make it useful. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency is constantly getting this satellite data, and you hear that maybe apocalyptic that 95% of the satellite data is never even looked at. So now we can look at much, much more and use it in a meaningful way. And of course, we're getting medical breakthroughs every single day. But there are significant risks too. The most obvious one that I find is the fear of job displacement. And we already have, you saw Jim Farley had a Ford complaining the other day about the entry-level jobs at Ford. People need 2 jobs just to make a living, which sort of an indictment of what Ford's doing. But we have this huge, not lower class, but underemployed class, or people who work full-time and can't make ends meet. And AI could potentially make this much, much worse. But then when we come to national security, we have this administration's inappropriate weaponization of the DoD's AI system. On the part of their cultural war on DEI, the administration has actually used AI to identify anything on their websites with reference to diversity, equity, or inclusion, including silly things like the word feminine or the word diverse, even when it has nothing to do with DEI. So he's taken down references to achievements of Americans of color, women, including the Navajo Code Talkers and the Tuskegee Airmen. More broadly, I'm very concerned about the race to reach artificial superintelligence, what some people call AGI. The race with China is a race to see who best can use artificial superintelligence, but it also may be a race to lose control. I am very concerned about what it's going to do to encryption and cybersecurity. I co-led a bill with Ted Lieu last Congress on preventing AI from being integrated into our nuclear launch system so that we couldn't launch a nuclear attack without humans in the loop. The bill seems incredibly obvious, but it's not yet passed. I think every year we try to get it into the NDAA. We will keep trying. And then there's the critical issue of the long-term artificial superintelligence. You've probably seen the new book out by Yudowsky and Soros, If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. I'm trying to convene a bunch of the deepest thinkers, physicists, computer scientists, philosophers, on both sides of that equation. The Stuart Russells and Jeff Hintons, Max Tegmarks on one side, and some pretty responsible people on the other side who don't think we'll ever get there. It's not accidental that the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist said we're 89 seconds to midnight. But to be positive again, President Putin's proposed extending the existing limits on the number of deployed long-range nuclear weapons under a New START treaty, which expires in only a few months. I was thrilled at the Arms Control Association meeting now 16 months ago when Jake Sullivan said unconditional talks with China, unconditional talks with Russia on restarting arms control agreements. President Trump has signaled his willingness to extend those mutual caps. Our little arms control working group that John mentioned, we've been writing every letter we can, every bill we can to support those efforts. We disagree with the vast majority of the president's foreign policy agenda and his domestic nuclear policy, but this is an area where there's reason to be hopeful. Because there's obviously, as you just go back to Helsinki and Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev, we have to have an extensive dialogue in this area. And by the way, it has to include China. Finally, there's Iran. I thought that JCPOA was one of the most hopeful things that got done in the Obama years. In my 4 years as ambassador to Switzerland, I thought the most constructive thing I was a small part of was getting Switzerland to stop trading Iran's oil, stop doing Iran's banking, stop being the middleman on the purchase of centrifuges. But when Trump pulled out of JCPOA, it was probably the biggest disaster of his first term. The whole notion of maximum pressure, the kinetic solutions, I don't think gets us to where we need to be at all. And this is a message that I'll continue to try to deliver to Congress as part of the working group with John Garamendi and Jeff Merkley and Ed Markey, and try to build a much broader coalition of allies inside and outside government. John and friends, as the rules-based international order continues to fray, the work of non-proliferation advocates has never been more important. And I want to thank you for not just your crucial interest, but all the great work you do on this topic. And I'm grateful to be a part of this panel this afternoon. And as we say in Congress, John, I yield back.
You're muted.
Congressman, you're muted.
But I am unmuted, so I'm not sure what's going on. I hope my remarks are coming through now. But Don, again, your comments are well taken, and it's great to have your voice in Congress on that range of issues that you covered. And we need that kind of intelligence and that kind of leadership to walk us through and lead us through what's a very, very difficult time on this. And what you've said is a great segue into our next panel. Having started it with AI and then moving on towards diplomacy and the need to have conversations with other countries and to be able to move on that. So thank you very, very much. And we look forward to continue working with you as well. I now get a chance to introduce our next moderator, and Laicie Heeley will be presenting her panel of Joe Cirincione, Mallory Stewart, and Jon Wolfsthal, all known to us, of course, as great diplomats and national security people and experts in their own right. And Laicie, of course, has been a leader in the area of national security for a long time. Despite her youthful looks and energy, she is the founding CEO of Inkstick Media. And she's the editor-in-chief of the foreign policy magazine, Inkstick. And you wouldn't think it would be that difficult to say, would you? And the executive director of the host of PRX and Inkstick's produced podcast, Things That Go Boom, on that aptly named. She has done reporting that you've heard on public radio stations in America and on the BBC. She has explored global security issues, including domestic terrorism, disinformation, nuclear weapons, and climate change. And I'm sure Laicie's going to engage our expert panel significantly, all of whom we know to have had good roles in the diplomacy in this country. Joe Cirincione, for one, who is a witness on hearings that I had back in the 1990s and 2000s on nuclear weapons policy and security on that. Mallory, of course, who's worked within the administration, as has Jon Wolfsthal on that and done great productive work there. So we're looking forward to watching this conversation, hearing it, and Laicie, please show us the way and lead that conversation. Thank you.
Hi, all. I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much, Jon. You would not think that it would be that hard to say. I said it in my head a million times before it became public, and everyone universally has a hard time saying Inkstick. So very much not alone there. Thank you all. I'm really honored to be here tonight to follow Representative Beyer and to follow all of the panelists that have come before. This is just a really impressive group of folks, including the folks that I'm about to introduce here. This topic couldn't be more timely or more important in this moment. We've called this panel Making a U-Turn, using diplomacy to avoid nuclear war. And we really do need a U-turn right now. Today, it's a very dangerous moment, not just in America, which Representative Beyer touched on just before me, but also around the world, and particularly with regard to nuclear weapons. Nuclear competition is intensifying. Guardrails like treaties are eroding, flashpoints are multiplying. All of the various Ukraine, India and Pakistan, Iran, everything that we've seen in just the last very short amount of time. And at the same time, trust between great powers is fraying. And all of these bad things come together to paint a very pessimistic picture. But tonight we are going to be trying really hard to think about opportunity and think about the ways in which arms control is evolving and not dead. Diplomacy may feel constrained, but it remains essential. And the question we'll explore tonight is, if we're serious about avoiding it, how do we change course? So we'll begin with short remarks from each of our panelists, and then we'll move into discussion and audience Q&A. Please join me in welcoming Joseph Cirincione, Mallory Stewart, and Jon Wolfsthal. And we're going to start off with Joe, who's a national security analyst and an author, and the former president of the Plowshares Fund. And his view may be a little more pessimistic. So we'll just start and get that right out of the way, and then we can move on to what we can do about it.
Thank you very much, Laicie, and thank you to the Center for having this conference and inviting me to be on this panel. I am pessimistic. I think the situation is grim. During the 80 years of the nuclear age, we have, even with the best leadership, avoided nuclear catastrophe by sheer luck, as the late Secretary of Defense Bob McNamara used to say. And now we have new dangerous developments, new actors that are introducing new risks into this already volatile mix of geopolitical rivalries, human fallibilities, rapid launch capabilities. This new reality requires new thinking. So where do we begin? How do we do that? First, we have to observe what's going on and orient ourselves. But this is harder than it seems because we're used to these patterns of behavior. We're used to these deterrence theories that we've developed over all these years, but they don't really fit what's going on right now. In brief, we have to recognize that we're in a new nuclear arms race, the first nuclear arms race since the 1980s. We're back racing with nuclear arms. We have 9 nuclear armed nations participating in this. All of them are building new nuclear weapons, some expanding their arsenals, but all of them adapting new defensive policies. They have new leadership in some of these countries. It's a volatile mix. That's the first indicator of where we are. Second, we have to understand that those of us who favor global stability and nuclear risk reductions and nuclear guardrails are in strategic retreat. We are losing. We haven't just lost, we are losing. The structures that we built up, conservatives and liberals, Democrats and Republicans over all these years, those are crumbling. Those are being actively dismantled as we speak. So our goal has to be to minimize those losses, preserve what we can preserve, and prevent the very worst from happening. And that leads me to the fourth sort of observation or strategy that we have overall. We have to recognize that we can't really do much about it right now. We're too weak. The forces in favor of more nuclear weapons are too powerful, but we can pave the way. We can start developing policies, start uniting people around a vision that we might be able to implement, at least in the United States, in 2 years or in 4 years, when those in power have to relinquish some or all of that power, and we can get a fresh start. But what is that fresh start going to be? Where is that new strategy? We have to understand that this is a daunting task, because the challenges are not in 1 or 2 areas, but across the board. Outdated doctrines, out of control budgets, entrenched nuclear bureaucracies, unstable leaders just among them. And we live in this period where our global and domestic restraint mechanisms are disappearing, including the arms control regimes that we built over decades. For example, just in our country alone, the Department of Defense has a leadership that is more ideological and less experienced than at any time in the nuclear age. This by itself is a risk factor that rarely gets brought into the kind of discussions you see in foreign affairs or foreign policy or other places. These are the kinds of things we have to understand is our new situation. Second, we have to analyze our own failures. If you want to plot a new course, you must understand how we got lost. So how did we go from a place just 16 years ago where we had a young, charismatic US president charting a path for the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons? How did we get from those hopes to today's fears? For example, arms control is not dead, but it is mostly dead. Could these agreements have been stronger? Was our strategy wrong? Why didn't the Biden administration make any changes at all to our nuclear policies, our nuclear posture, and our nuclear budgets? What went wrong there? We don't have an understanding of that yet. We have to at first look at our failures. Second, for example, the arms control and disarmament groups are not dead, but they're almost dead. Those of us who tried to shape and implement responsible nuclear policies in this century must confront our collective failure. What we're doing isn't working. There's not been a meaningful step that physically reduced nuclear threats since the 2015 JCPOA, the Iran deal, and that was short-lived. In the world of strategic weapons, that last significant change was 2010 with the New START Treaty, and that is on the ropes, months away from expiration. So we have to acknowledge that the nuclear arms control and disarmament treaties, agreements, and global organizations have failed. We have to understand what happened there, what was the failure, in order to then get to the third step, which is to recognize that we face unique nuclear risks in this current period of the nuclear age. Things are different now. It's popular these days to talk about a new nuclear age. Many of the people who talk about that are on different sides of the ideological spectrum. Vipin Narang and Pranay Vadi, for example, have a version of this they wrote in Foreign Affairs, where they largely key on China. And most of the new nuclear age theorists talk about China. And that's a factor, of course. And the desire of new countries to get nuclear weapons, both old so-called, rogue states, but also some of our European allies now considering that. But they ignore the really big change that has occurred. And this is what I want to focus on. For the first time in the history of the nuclear age, the vast majority of nuclear weapons in the world are controlled by authoritarian leaders. We have nuclear authoritarians in the world, and we've had them since the beginning. We got used to the Soviet Union getting nuclear weapons. We got used to China getting nuclear weapons, and most recently North Korea. Those were cases of nations that already had authoritarian regimes getting nuclear weapons, but now we have nuclear weapon states that have become authoritarian regimes. Think about it. This is different from the 1990s, even from the beginning of the 20th century. India is an authoritarian regime. Pakistan is an authoritarian regime. Israel is an authoritarian regime. The United States is an authoritarian regime. You can quibble over whether it's in process of becoming that. Rachel Maddow talks about it as an authoritarian regime now in the period of consolidating its power. Some political scientists talk about us as now being an illiberal democracy, but that is the path we are on. In my view, it is likely that Donald Trump is going to consolidate this authoritarian regime. What does that mean for nuclear policy, for nuclear doctrine? Most of the people writing about the new nuclear age don't even touch this issue, but we've got to consider it here. For example, I wrote down some thoughts here. One is, of course, that you have largely one-man launch, one-man control over nuclear weapons. Some of the countries have groups of people that decide, but they're authoritarian regimes, so those groups usually answer to the leader. What does it mean that 7 of the 9 nuclear-armed states are under control of one possibly unstable authoritarian leader? You have the policies of these governments. Authoritarian regimes believe in territorial aggrandizement. Putin, Russia wants Ukraine. China wants Taiwan. India and Pakistan want Kashmir. Israel wants Gaza and the West Bank. Trump wants Canada and Greenland and sometimes Gaza. This territorial acquisition is going to increase the risks of war. And there you get another risk. Authoritarian leaders are more likely to threaten nuclear weapons, as we've seen by Putin in Russia, than democratic leaders are. So you have another increase. You have a weakening global order where these authoritarian leaders are actively dismantling the existing liberal international order, some wanting to replace it with their own version, but others just destroying it to get in their way. And that also, and for us, it also means that our alliance system is weakening due to the authoritarian nature of our current president and the doubts people have about his willingness to defend them. All of these are new risk factors. Almost none of them have been explored in the literature or in debates. That's as my view, that's the biggest challenge we face, developing a new theory for nuclear security in an authoritarian age. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Joe. Next up is Mallory Stewart, who led the State Department's Bureau of Arms Control, Deterrence, and Stability, which is the team charged with both keeping existing guardrails intact and building new ones. So this should be a perfect follow-on. Mallory, help us out here. How do we move forward in this moment?
Thank you so much, Laicie, and thank you to the Center for inviting me. I don't disagree with anything that Joe said. I take the position of, yes, we have a problem. Arms control is challenged. The environment is not good for sort of creating new traditional mechanisms of arms control. And there's a lack of political will, right? All of the stuff we heard on the last panel, disinformation, making our rules-based international order harder to maintain, to understand, attribution, accountability, the zero-sum diplomacy that we see now that, you know, in the US, we can't have any positive value given to China because that means the US must be declining. There's a swirling number of factors, including the politicization of the national security arena, and of course, the deep polarization of the nuclear security field, but really the entire US government. So all of that is absolutely true. But my approach has always been, and what I think we have to still do is figure out how to push ahead, not give up. We can understand these challenges and evaluate why things went off the tracks. I don't disagree with Joe on that, but I think we have to keep trying. And so what I'm going to use my 5 minutes to do is just give examples of how things have evolved and can continue to evolve. So traditional arms control considered the necessity of a willing partner. I would argue that going forward, we should rely on the international community in whole or in part if we can't find that willing partner. And the example I'll give is the direct assent destructive ASAT prohibition. First, the US in 2022, Vice President Harris announced our unilateral commitment not to conduct direct assent Earth to space destructive ASAT tests, anti-satellite testing. Then we went forward to the UN, and in the fall at the first committee, we actually proposed a resolution that would prohibit such direct assent DA ASAT tests. Now, of course, we did it in part because the most recent DA ASAT test was Russia in November of 2021, creating thousands of pieces of debris. Prior to that, we had India in 2019, and we had famously in 2007, China creating over 4,000 pieces of long-lived debris that required the maneuvering of Chinese satellites, the space station, and numerous other space assets to avoid collision with that debris. So we developed a resolution, and the exciting part about this is that we didn't have a willing partner in those three countries that, of course, had conducted direct descent destructive ASATs, but we explained to the world why the common need of the international community was a safe and sustainable space environment for our assets to proceed unencumbered by potential impact from debris, that the DA ASAT tests themselves were not helpful because they created this long-lived debris and they destabilized the space environment. Our unilateral commitment helped us come to the table with credibility, but we were able to negotiate a resolution in the UN First Committee that's verifiable. It's not technically legally binding. These First Committee resolutions are political in nature, right? We can't force countries to impose legal consequences for violations thereof. But we will now see, and 155 countries voted along with us, and our co-leads in this conversation in the form of 45 countries, including Japan, South Korea, numerous other countries that helped us with this, but most specifically Brazil, one of the BRICS that actually signed on and helped us take this forward. So they signed on to a resolution that prohibited direct descent, destructive ASAT testing, and despite being non-legally binding, it was verifiable because you can watch something from Earth to space, you can see it hit a satellite, and you can then follow up and say, what's the explanation? This seems like a clear-cut violation of what the international community, for the majority of the international community, 155 countries, agree is irresponsible space behavior. And then we can decide on the consequences, hopefully, based on the attribution of that activity. And so there should be some accountability. We are taking principles of arms control, which is evolving into risk reduction. We're moving away from requiring a willing partner to put this in place, but we're using a non-binding tool with the multilateral and international community in whole or in part, but hopefully the vast majority, to achieve something that's attributable and hopefully enforceable. One example of how we have to move beyond our traditional thinking of where effective arms control lies in this new environment that Joe aptly laid out. The next issue I want to discuss is the requirement in the arms control field for treaties and agreements. They still are sort of something that we should work towards, but I think we should look in this environment in which treaties are very difficult, that there's very little political will, even in our own government, to support international law. We should look to new methods to compel responsible behaviors. In this example, I'm going to reach a little bit further back to the Obama administration, to the framework for the destruction of the Syrian chemical weapon program that we agreed with Russia to implement. What a ridiculous chutzpah thing to assume that two governments can force a third government in the middle of a civil war to give up one of its most potent, dangerous, and fear-inducing stockpiles. Now, we all know that Syria held on to a significant portion of its stockpile. We knew that was going to be a problem, but it was worth it to the US government to utilize Russia's coming together with us on the danger of this stockpile to actually force Syria to join the Chemical Weapons Convention and then to utilize the legal mechanisms of the Chemical Weapons Convention and UNSCR, the UN Security Council resolution, to force compliance with this somewhat audacious framework that was negotiated by us in Russia. So we were able to use a never before used trick of political pressure, military pressure on Syria to say, here is the US, clearly not an ally of Syria, and Russia, clearly an ally of Syria, agreeing that Syria had to comply with the Chemical Weapons Convention, had to put its stockpile forward for verification and destruction under international oversight. And there had to be some mechanism whereby we could track that, confirm verification. And now, again, realizing we didn't destroy all of it and they continued to use, but we were able to destroy 1,300 tons of chemical weapons in the middle of a civil war, take that out of the usable amount of weapons, and we were able to then have OPCW oversight until Russia voted against continuing the Joint Investigative Mechanisms Authority in the UN, until Russia voted against continuing some of the OPCW's authorities, but we were able to eliminate 23 production facilities and again 1,300 tons of chemical weapons. So it was a step forward in risk reduction and arms control that didn't actually require us to negotiate a new treaty. We relied on existing structures. So that is the second sort of evolution of where arms control needs to go towards risk reduction and risk management. First, don't necessarily need a willing partner. Second, don't necessarily need new treaties and agreements, just thinking outside of the box of how you utilize existing structures. Third, there's always an assumption that you need allies and partners, or you need political countries that view the political environment and treaty structures the same way you do. Like-minded partners. This coalition of the willing is often tossed around. The concepts that you have to work with like-minded. I think if we're going to get to risk reduction moving forward, we have to expand that and work with whomever is interested in achieving risk reduction in the context that we're interested in. And so my example for this is the political declaration on the responsible use of AI in the military, an initiative started by the Biden administration in 2023 as part of South Korea and the Netherlands conference on discussing the responsible uses of AI in the military. We proposed this political declaration. It has 10 very basic concepts of what the military can do across, militaries, regardless of their size and capability, to reduce the risks that AI automatically brings into their system. So some of the concepts are, try to ensure that your AI is used in a manner consistent with international law, have some oversight for the use of AI, don't use AI for purposes that it was not developed for, understand the risks of inherent human bias that are brought in by any reliance on AI, and then AI systems upon AI systems understand how that can escalate, exacerbate, and synergistically enhance some of the risks of hallucinations and other challenges. So we had 10 very basic principles. Over the course of the following 2 years, before the end of the Biden administration, we got 58 countries to sign on. And the reason I think this is a good example is that many of these countries were not our traditional partners, not our political allies, they didn't even view the world necessarily in the same way. Yes, our NATO partners signed on this political declaration, but we also got countries such as Malawi and Djibouti, Dominican Republic, Bahrain, San Marino. We got countries outside of our traditional networks to lead some of the working groups. So we had 3 working groups, and they were excited to step up and to say, this is our understanding, this is our sense of confusion about the progression of AI. The most important part of this political declaration was trying to agree upon a common definition, right? That's such a big challenge in emerging tech spaces for treaty making, is that the definitions, the understandings of the concepts evolve so rapidly. So we had a definition of AI that we all were utilizing for the purposes of this political declaration. And through the course of the 2 years where this 58, loose affiliation member-led process, not US-led, but member-led process developed, we had countries present their regulations, present their challenges. We had examples of companies coming in and highlighting how they learned the hard way some of these AI challenges, and we shared our process. And we shared our history with respect to our own DoD uses of AI and how they had developed responsible behavior. So it was risk reduction through looking to as broad an audience possible, not requiring political agreement on our concept of democracy, not requiring political agreement on which treaties or legal structures we adhere to, but just requiring a concern of the risks going forward from a certain tech, especially in the military domain. So looking for partners outside of our traditional networks because we share a common concern of risks and we want to see those managed and reduced. And then finally, the fourth point, just very generally, is there has, as Joe mentioned, become this polarized concept in nuclear policy that somehow arms control is at odds with deterrence. This is a concept I've seen developing actually since before the Obama administration, that somehow the arms control community which is equated often with disarmament, is somehow at odds with having a safe, secure, and effective nuclear arsenal, or at odds with the national security community that feels that we need more protection, more weapons. I think that dichotomy is a challenge and will diminish our capacity to achieve risk reduction going forward. People have to put themselves into camps in this model. They say, I'm team deterrence versus I'm team arms control. And I apologize. Many of you have heard me make this point in the past. I'm a little bit of a broken record. I believe arms control, risk reduction, non-proliferation, nuclear deterrence, extended deterrence, they're all intermingled and part of this mutually reinforcing security blanket, a blanket that really you can pull strands and it diminishes elsewhere and it strengthens here and it strengthens there. It's really all interrelated, and extended deterrence is a perfect example of something that supports non-proliferation, supports arms control, but also supports our national security from a deterrence perspective. So I could talk about that forever, but that last point is just that we really need to look more toward bridge building across the spectrum, seeking the common objective that we all share, which is national security and global stability, understanding that it doesn't have to be zero sum. We can find value that we agree upon and work towards that. And I think that's where I'll stop for now. Looking forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory. Closing us out tonight will be Jon Wolfsthal, Director of Global Risk at FAS and a former White House and NSC senior official on arms control and non-proliferation. I think Jon will also have some ideas about moving forward and the need for diplomacy and being clear about what we're trying to accomplish.
Great. Thank you, Laicie. Thank you, Jon, Congressman Tierney, and thanks to Joe and Mallory for letting me be on a panel with you, which I enjoy. And thanks to the council for organizing this so it ends before the Yankee game, so I can go and watch. Joe, I know you don't have that problem, so you're good. I was asked to talk a little bit about what diplomacy might seek, and if we're going to use diplomacy to avoid the arms race or get out of the trap that we're in, what would we actually seek to achieve, and how would that benefit American security? And so I've broken this down into 4 main categories: preventing the deliberate use of nuclear weapons, preventing the accidental or unintended use of nuclear weapons, preventing the spread of nuclear weapons, both the vertical increase, arms racing, and the horizontal spread to more and more states, and the need to achieve those goals by preventing conflicts. And so those are sort of the 4 buckets that I think our diplomatic effort should be geared at, recognizing some of these things may seem, not just seem, will be hard to do with the cast that we have. These are not things that these would be hard things for a normal administration to pursue. We are not in a time with a normal administration. That being said, it is a factional construct, and there are players all over the map, some who are irresponsible, untrustworthy, and unhinged, but who have instincts that may actually be beneficial if they can be harnessed. And so, unfortunately, we have to figure out how to play these horses and figure out which ones might be running in the right direction, even if it's a wide open pasture and we have no idea where they may end up. And so what I would propose, not taking exception with anything that's been said, because I agree with almost everything Joe and Mallory have talked about, none of these would point in the direction of formal treaties, because I just think even if the administration could get its act together, the Senate is so dysfunctional, the Congress is so dysfunctional, and quite frankly, the MAGA ambition to remake America in a very different image is ascendant. And so it's going to be very hard to imagine other forces agreeing to work with them on something lasting. So where would I put efforts? One interesting actor in today's landscape is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who appears not to be completely insane, unlike our Secretary of Defense or our president. And so I think it's important to recognize that the chairman is probably already engaged with his counterparts in Russia and China. This is something that happened under previous Trump administration without the direct authorization or direction from the president. I'm personally not seeking to try to call out, yes, they should do this and they should tell us when they do it. But my hope is actually that they are engaged with the Russian and Chinese CHODs, because I think that's a critical component that should any of the countries see things in their leadership's behavior that is out of the ordinary, that the chairman and the chiefs of defense can pick up the phone and call each other to try to at least gain some understanding. In a case like this, I don't think, quite frankly, as much as I love the Nuclear Risk Reduction Center, Mallory, I know you do too, I don't think it's very likely to be helpful when a more junior diplomat uses the NERC to send a message. I think it's going to take high-level intervention. And so I think if the presidents can't be trusted to engage, I think the chairman and his counterparts likely will need to. The second, and we've seen this sort of play out over the last couple of weeks, is this idea of political commitments not to exceed the limits in the New START treaty. Russia, Putin proposed it, sparked a little debate in the United States among nuclear techno-weenies. Should we accept? Should we not accept? But Trump indicated a willingness to pursue it. Russia then said, yeah, that's great that you want to pursue it. It's unclear whether the Trump administration can figure out how to put one foot in front of the other. But there's a deal there for a political commitment not to exceed the 1550 numbers if the other side also maintains that level. Some of the advocates for increasing U.S. nuclear forces to upload our forces onto ICBMs don't like that because they think somehow it would inhibit our ability to plan to implement upload after a year. I don't see any reason why that would be the case. There's no reason the Defense Department couldn't undergo procurement and retrofitting if it was deemed necessary. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you hitting happy hour on time. That they couldn't move forward that under a political commitment for 1 year. And so I think it makes good sense for the United States to pursue it. I personally would go further if I were in a position of advising a president to say that the United States should maintain the New START limits unless the president identifies a particular military requirement that requires the United States to exceed 1550. And I think this is something that the Congress, should they actually be interested in engaging in their congressional oversight responsibilities, might require from the president. There is a requirement for the nuclear employment guidance to be reported to the Congress. That's something that should be extended. And in certain cases, I can see a world where Russia went above 1550 and it still wouldn't create a new military requirement forcing the United States to go above 1550. That requirement might be a political requirement. You might say it's a diplomatic requirement, but I think I'm old-fashioned. I think you should deploy nuclear weapons if you actually have a military need. And if you don't, then we should spend that money elsewhere. And I think that's actually an argument that is worth leaning into, getting to Mallory's last point about these are tools of national security. And if there's not a national security reason to build more of them, then that money should be played elsewhere. I personally think another initiative should be to push for the goal of U.S. and Russia to actually adopt a cap of 1,000 strategic nuclear weapons and to say that we will maintain those limits as long as China does not exceed the 1,000 level. That's a very difficult thing for the United States political construct to do, but we have to realize that we are not going to match both Russian and Chinese strategic nuclear forces. We simply don't have the defense industrial base to build enough nuclear weapons and to build enough launchers to match Russia and China over the next 20 years, period. So if we decide to race, we will lose. So do we want to create an environment where we lose an arms race because that's the path we're on? Or do we at least want to lean into the construct where we would say we are prepared to live in a world of trilateral nuclear parity with Russia and China, recognizing that we still have strategic interests and we are still prepared to defend our allies? That is a very challenging change for the United States to pursue. But let's face it, we're in the middle of the most tumultuous period of American foreign policy in generations. And so why not put that on the table? And I actually think that that's where the left and the right may come around to meet and sort of cut out the nuclear center, which supports increases. I think we have to think seriously about transparency in missile defenses. The United States and the Golden Dome Initiative are not going to outlive President Trump. So in 3 years, that will not be sustained, is my opinion. But Russia and China are also building pretty capable air defenses. They're involved in building integrated air and missile defenses, and those present real capabilities against shorter range U.S. cruise and ballistic missiles. So the United States has an interest in trying to talk about how many interceptors we are going to deploy at any given time. We are not going to go from 0 space-based interceptors to 100 anytime soon. So why could the United States not declare we are not going to have space-based interceptors next year, and every year update that? How many missile defense launchers or interceptors will we have? This is an idea that Jim Timby has pushed for many, many years, and I think has great value in trying to avoid both an offensive and a defensive race at the same time that, again, I worry that we will lose. And then lastly, on this issue, I'm particularly worried about INF basing modes. Intermediate range nuclear forces are a problem. Russia's violation of the treaty presents real challenges for European and Asian security. But I can distinguish between Russia having land-based intermediate range nuclear forces as part of their military brigades and deploying INF systems in maritime shipping containers that can go on commercial ships. And so the United States and Russia and China are all going to be deploying INF systems in the next 5 years. We should state clearly that those are going to be designated military systems and that we will not commingle military and civilian launchers for any purpose. And that we find anybody who does do that will have violated the Geneva Convention and international law. The concern is that if you have commercial ships that are carrying INF launchers off the coast of the United States or Japan or South Korea or Taiwan, the possibility for misunderstanding or rumor mill or misinformation, disinformation to spark a crisis becomes extreme. And so that's something I think we need to pay a little bit of attention to. I've gone on a little too long, so let me point out 2 last concerns and then 1 idea. There's a good report that's just come out by a very senior group from the Carnegie Endowment, Belfer Center, and Nuclear Threat Initiative on concern about wider proliferation to U.S. allies and adversaries. None of us have faced this in our lifetimes. We simply don't know what a world will look like with 20 nuclear states. It is a world that we successfully prevented in the 1960s and one that we are rapidly running into. And I think that there is a role for not only members of the executive branch, but of the legislative branch and civil society to be very strongly working with our allies in explaining why, even if they feel insecure, which they do, and even if their trust in the United States is being reduced, which it is, nuclear weapons are not the answer. I would sell our allies any conventional missile, bomber, strike aircraft, naval asset technology in the book before I would want to see them develop nuclear weapons. Not from a deterrence point of view, but from a U.S. national security point of view. And if the risk is that you're going to see these countries, whether it's Poland or the Baltics or South Korea, go nuclear, and you can provide them with something else, then we need to think very seriously about that. And of course, the real problem is if the answer is, well, what about more U.S. nuclear weapons? Then this community has a challenge because we don't want vertical proliferation and we don't want horizontal proliferation, but what do we want less and what are we prepared to tolerate? That's a real challenge that I think we're going to confront. Okay, Joe was pretty depressing. Mallory was a little less so. I'm going to end with a real bang, which is if you think today is bad, think ahead to the period of 2026 and 27. Whether Donald Trump loses control of the Congress or not, unless he seizes power through a illegal, non-constitutional coup, he's going to have a limited time span in office. And at any point, he's mortal. And our adversaries know that this is the best chance they will ever have to take what they want without the United States acting on it. So whether that is China and Taiwan, whether that is Putin and NATO territory, or whether that is somebody else, I worry very much about what that period looks like. And if you think we're unprepared for a world with more nuclear weapon states, we are really unprepared for a world in which our adversaries decide now's the time. And I don't have the answer for that, but that's what I think we need to be thinking of. Okay, my suggestion is, I've talked about this with a few people, and I think it's worth considering. Joe is right. Our community has had a real problem giving voice to our ideas and to understanding what's gone wrong and what we should be doing. But that's true for the forces that support the rule of law, for a rules-based international order, and for the United States to be a reliable partner. And I think the time's come for the United States and the Democratic Party to think about shadow government. A shadow Secretary of Defense, a shadow Secretary of State, a shadow National Security Advisor, drawn from the Congress, who will be a focal point to talk about these issues. And we should be looking to recruit who would be our candidates for those positions, and how do we get them to understand our issues and to talk knowledgeably about them. I can think of a few people I'd like to recruit for those positions, but I'm at a loss to think of anything better. And I hope you all can, but that's my positive suggestion to round out my really dour prediction. So sorry for going on a little long, and look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, John. I'm not gonna lie, that last suggestion raised my heart rate just a little bit. I really appreciate all of your great remarks. I'm really looking forward. We have just a little bit of time for questions, so I'm gonna take the moderator's prerogative and sort of jump in. Mallory, I want to ask you. So you said the arms control is evolving rather than just disappearing, and gave a lot of great examples. But as Joe points out, a lot has changed. As John points out, we're in a very dangerous moment right now. I'm curious, specifically, if you agree with John that initiatives like Golden Dome are not going to outlive President Trump, and B, are there tools on the table in this moment, this unique moment that we're in, that could counter this momentum toward buildup?
Yeah, thank you, Laicie. I refuse to ever admit defeat on the concept of not having tools. I think there are tools. There's always tools, right? We got to a place of understanding after just one meeting on risk reduction with China, so that we said it would be in your interest to give a missile launch notification in November of 2023. And admittedly, it took them a little time till the summer of 2024, but they gave the first missile launch notification in 44 years with respect to an ICBM that went beyond their territory in the other direction. I feel like there's always tools. It's just our willingness to give it a try. And I believe very much that we should be trying everything. I don't discount the ability to have engagement, to try to find mutual perceptions of threat, right? We used to have really productive space security dialogues with China and Russia, where we discussed our mutual sort of concerns in the space environment that we, of course, relied on so heavily for military purposes and other reasons. We just got to, at the end of the previous administration, President Biden, President Xi got to a moment of agreement on some type of human in the loop. I don't know what that means going forward with the Trump administration. I think we can't give up. We have tools at our disposal, and we can create new tools. So I don't think that we should ever say we don't have tools for this environment. I agree, it's a hugely challenging environment. But just look at what we've been able to do in contexts in which people thought there was no forward progress, right? I heard every single day when I was in the Arms Control Bureau, often from inside the State Department, that arms control was dead. And yet we were able to conclude 3 first committee resolutions that all achieved arms control, one of them prohibiting radiological weapons. We got 165 countries to agree with us, including some of those non-traditional partners. We had an agreement at the end of the administration on supporting the Outer Space Treaty, especially Article 4's prohibition on placing a nuclear weapon in orbit. There's stuff to build on. We just need to figure it out. We need to be creative, and we need to try it and try to find those elements of commonality that both John and Joe recognized exist, right? That there is this concern of destabilization of international architectures, even if Russia and China potentially allege that these architectures were created by the US, even though they were equal partners in creating those international legal structures. There is a recognition of the importance of some of these these architectures, the importance of multilateral efforts. China is stepping up and trying to fill all the roles that we've left with their own participants. So they understand that it's an important thing to do in the multilateral space. I think if we can come together with China and say, okay, we both recognize the importance of multilateralism in this context. I mean, I think that may be a big push for this administration, but if we can do it, we can then build on that commonality to find where we can support it and reduce the risks of its further diminishment. I think disinformation is something that everyone should recognize is not in our interest, is not in any government interest, to not have a capacity to communicate clearly or credibly on important issues. Russia itself will have that problem if it wants to communicate with its people, and disinformation has denied it that capacity. That's also a commonality. So looking for those threats that we all face together, or those fears that we all have, and then using our huge toolkit of potential engagement, of opportunities to persuade through economic means, which I know is sensitive to say right now, the opportunity to demonstrate that there's sympathetic groups within countries. Scientists can come together. The old cooperative monitoring center model at Sandia, bringing scientists from opposite sides of political debates together to try to achieve something a common purpose. I think that's an option. So I didn't really give you specifics, Laicie, but I just say never say we don't have the tools. Always keep trying.
Yeah, Joe, do you agree? And also, I'm curious. What you also mentioned that our calls to build more weapons repeat some of the oldest mistakes of the nuclear age. So why do you think that this logic still resonates in Washington, and this that these things remain, these strategies that you say are that potentially haven't worked, that have gotten us here?
Got it. Okay, thank you. A couple of quick things. Mallory, I love your optimism. I don't share it. I don't think the struggle is at that level. I think that's the kind of thing you do and encourage when you have a government or governments that are generally inclined to move towards arms control. That is not the strategic situation we're in. That's what I'm talking about. We are in the age of authoritarianism, including in our own country, and this is grim. So let me just, why are we losing that on the nuclear front? I mean, if you scrape together all the budgets of all the arms control and disarmament groups together, they would account for 1 hour of nuclear spending that goes on in this country. We're spending $100 billion on nuclear weapons. That is a force of nature. The defense corporations have completely rigged the system. When's the last time there was a congressional hearing that provided meaningful oversight over U.S. nuclear weapons and policy? I can tell you, last century, John Tierney was doing those hearings. I mean, we're just lost. We have lost the debate. We've lost the grip on this whole process. So how do you get that back? One of the ways you get that back is, if I'm right, if the biggest nuclear threat is authoritarians with nuclear weapons, we should be joining the anti-authoritarian movements. Is arms control really our #1 strategic priority right now? Is having conferences on arms control really what we should be doing about? If Trump consolidates, and as I say, there's at least a 50-50 chance he will, there is not going to be a nuclear policy debate. There are not going to be debates. So for me, I think we should be taking our organizations and merging them with this pro-democratic, small d, anti-authoritarian movements, and bringing the nuclear weapons issue along with us, to have them understand that the threat of authoritarianism is not just about civil liberties, but it's also about existential risk of nuclear annihilation, that they're one and the same. Authoritarian regimes here and abroad increase nuclear dangers. We should be part of those authoritarian movements. Maybe that's an orientation that can rescue what I believe is the continuing and probably inevitable decline of the arms control groups. We are simply withering away slowly. Every year a group drops out. We need to do something dramatically different to reverse that course. I hope we can find the solution in time.
Mallory, I want to give you a very quick two-finger to
very quick two-finger. And that's just that, Joe, I don't disagree with you. There's this huge existential threat that we face, and authoritarianism does seem to be taking over the systems of the world. I just feel like that doesn't mean we stop trying. I mean, that's the reason that I'm optimistic, is that we have to keep trying everything. And if it's joined in other organizations, the climate change movement, I think, has a lot of support, a lot of overlap with existential crisis that we face in the WMD arena. We should do it. I just think we should try everything, not give up on anything, despite facing what I do agree with you is a challenge, a huge lack of
I will drink to that.
Okay.
I will drink to that.
Well, I need wine, but I'll share my soda with you.
All right, moving to Jon. Jon, you may close us out. We have only 2 minutes left, but I want to ask you, which U.S. allies do you think are most at risk of proliferation in the near term? And what are some concrete, I'm really trying to pull out some concrete steps from y'all that we can take to reassure those allies, because the U.S. has also a massive credibility problem.
South Korea is at the top of my list. I think they are poised for a South Korea first movement. We're very fortunate, I think, that the democratic system in South Korea held, but nuclear weapons proliferation is very popular in South Korea. And then I think, quite frankly, I worry a lot about Finland. I know it seems weird. And it's very hard for me to go to those countries where I have done some work and say that they're wrong to feel insecure. They are right to feel insecure. I don't believe that Donald Trump will come and protect them. And I don't want our adversaries to know or hear that, but they can figure it out on their own. So the question is, how does the United States or how do other countries move to their defense? So I think we need to be supporting NATO to be doing as much as they can. So I support increases in NATO defense spending. I think we should be, as transactional as it is, we should be supportive of Donald Trump and the Defense Department's efforts to sell more American weaponry to Europe. Whatever they will buy, we should be willing to sell. And I think that's true in South Korea. And I think in South Korea, we have to be working as much as we can on the trilateral relationship. That's going to be much harder with the new Japanese prime minister, who's a Abe disciple. But I think the dynamic can be very much the enemy of my enemy is my friend. She's going to be very worried about China. Japan and South Korea are both still worried about China. And I think the more we can encourage them to work together, the more likely it is that they will hold until another election, should we have one.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jon, Joe, Mallory. I appreciated all of your thoughts, and thank you to everyone for being here. With that, I will hand it back over for our closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Laicie. It was a great job and a great panel. Thank you, Joe and Jon and Mallory. I just want to say, Jon Wolfsthal, great way to start off a panel about policy and diplomatic care by slamming poor Joe, whose team is not in the World Series, and I, as a Boston Nation person, taking a little offense as well. So
I insulted my former boss and my host, so I apologize.
all in one fell swoop. But no, look, that was incredibly interesting on that. I know we didn't get to a lot of the questions from folks online, and I reiterate what I said about the earlier panel. We will try to get answers to you by email on that. Don't give up on that, and keep pressing us for it if we don't get out to you as soon as you want. But to all of you, to Laicie and to Joe and to Mallory and to Jon, that was really stimulating, and it was very thought-provoking. It's disturbing at a lot of different levels, but you've given us some ideas and some ways to articulate the situation that we're in with respect to the notion of getting together with other issue groups and joining forces on that. I see some leaders on this very panel who could take some leadership and move in that direction, and others who would follow along quite willingly. It's not that we haven't been trying. I just don't think that people have exactly figured out how to do it or how to spark the interest in the other groups to rally them together. But I think we should work together to try to do that on that, because all of the concerns that you raised are important, and all of the hope that Mallory and others put out there is also incredibly important on that. So we have to move in that direction. So thank you, all of you, for your contributions to this particular conference. Now I have the opportunity to present our commentator who's going to make closing remarks on this, Dr. John Burroughs. Dr. Burroughs is the senior analyst at the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy in New York City. He's been a member of the legal team for the Marshall Islands and his nuclear disarmament concerns in the International Court of Justice, their cases. He has publications that include two, at least, that I can think of. The Legality of Threat or Use of Nuclear Weapons, a Guide to Historic Opinion of the International Court of Justice, which was released in 1998. And his more recent Inadmissibility of Nuclear Threats, which were published in the Arms Control Today in April of 2004. He's taught international law as an adjunct professor at Rutgers Law School. I know his comments are going to tie together much of what we've talked about today on terms, and close us out with a note that'll leave us so engaged that we'll continue this discussion long after we're finished here tonight. Dr. Burroughs.
Well, thank you, Congressman, and thank you for the challenging assignment. I'm going to try to say a few things relevant to both panels, starting with the first one. And my focus is going to be on international law, which actually is integrated into U.S. policy. So I'll begin with international law relating to use of lethal autonomous weapons generally. Simply put, at a minimum, humans must ensure and are responsible and accountable for ensuring that use of autonomous weapons complies with the law of armed conflict, also known as law of war or as international humanitarian law. Its key principles are discrimination between military objectives on the one hand and non-combatants and civilian objects on the other, proportionality, and precaution. The Department of Defense Law of War Manual, last revised in 2023, is clear on this proposition. It states, it is persons who must comply with the law of war. For example, persons may not use inherently indiscriminate weapons. In addition, this goes to the autonomous weapon question. In addition, in the situation in which a person is using a weapon that selects and engages targets autonomously, that person must refrain from using that weapon where it is expected to result in incidental harm that is excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage expected to be gained. That's the requirement of proportionality. Then, as to precaution, the manual says the obligation on the person using the weapon to take feasible precautions in order to reduce the risk of civilian casualties may be more significant when the person uses weapon systems with more sophisticated autonomous functions. For example, such feasible precautions a person is obligated to take may include monitoring the operation of the weapon system. So all that is right in the DoD Law of War Manual. There's law that applies to autonomous weapons. A UN group of government experts with wide participation of governments has been working to develop text for a proposed treaty governing autonomous weapons. A key provision of a rolling text states, context-appropriate human judgment and control is needed to ensure the use and effects of autonomous weapon systems are in compliance with international law, in particular IHL, including the principles and requirements of distinction, proportionality, and precautions in attack. To implement that principle, a number of elements are proposed. Paul Sherry usefully summarized their direction in his book, Army of None. Human judgment about the lawfulness of an attack based on specific information about the target, weapon, and context for attack, and bounding of the weapon's autonomy in space, time, possible targets, and means of attack. How do these principles apply to use of AI and autonomous systems when it comes to nuclear weapons? Well, as was mentioned in the first panel, the Department of Defense accepts and emphasizes the need for human judgment. In 2024, Strategic Commander James Cotton said that while modernization of NC3 must integrate advanced technologies, such as an artificial intelligence, to process massive amounts of data efficiently, human oversight remains non-negotiable. He stated, AI supports decision-making, but humans will always stay in control. The 2022 Nuclear Posture Review states, in all cases, the United States will maintain a human in the loop for all actions critical to informing and executing decisions by the president to initiate and terminate nuclear weapon employment. Well, as also became clear in the first panel, these general statements, while welcome, do not answer key questions such as, will AI propose options or make recommendations? in the situation of responding to a nuclear attack. Laying out the options, of course, will tend to shape the decision, especially if there is a perceived need for rapid decision-making. Another question is, how will it be ensured that AI-produced or assisted data analysis is reliable, as in determining that a reported incoming nuclear attack is genuine, or estimating collateral damage and injury resulting from a responsive attack. The Biden administration's framework to advance AI governance provided that the U.S. government shall, quote, use force informed by AI systems in a manner that complies with all applicable law and policy, including obligations under international humanitarian law. It further spelled out requirements for use in any military operation of AI in determining collateral damage and injury, including rigorous testing and oversight by trained personnel. The Trump administration terminated the framework. However, the requirement under the law of armed conflict of ensuring compliance with its principles remain. Now, let's say, however, that the integration of AI into nuclear weapons operations can be managed responsibly and humans remain in control. That does not solve the problem of reliance on nuclear arms. Putting aside marginal situations like an attack on a remote target in a desert, it is not possible to use nuclear weapons in compliance with requirements of discrimination and proportionality. Nuclear explosions involve mass destruction and uncontrollable spread of radiation, to put the matter briefly. Now, I realize that this runs counter to even a narrow concept of nuclear deterrence. Be ready to respond with nuclear arms to a nuclear attack and therefore deter such an attack. This is the moral dilemma of reliance on nuclear weapons and understood right from the beginning of the nuclear age. It seems the only way out is to decrease reliance on nuclear weapons, entrench the norm of non-use and non-threat of nuclear weapons, and accomplish their verifiable global elimination. Meetings of the G20 in Bali in 2022 and New Delhi in 2023 contributed, hopefully significantly, to this process, declaring that, quote, the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible. So do I have a few more minutes, Congressman?
Yes, you do, certainly.
Okay. So I'll just make a few comments on nuclear arms control and disarmament, especially with the 11th Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference coming up in the spring of 2026. I want to remind you of NPT and international law disarmament-related obligations and commitments. In brief, at the 2000 NPT Review Conference, the United States and other NPT parties agreed to an outcome document which included the following provision: an unequivocal undertaking by the nuclear weapon states to accomplish the total elimination of their nuclear arsenals, leading to nuclear disarmament in accordance with Article 6 of the NPT. That was repeated in the outcome document of the 2010 NPT Review Conference. Other commitments made in 2000 and 2010 include the engagement as soon as appropriate of all the nuclear weapon states in the process leading to the total elimination of the nuclear weapons, further efforts by the nuclear weapon states to reduce their nuclear arsenals unilaterally, and importantly, a diminishing role for nuclear weapons in security policies to minimize the risk that these weapons will ever be used and to facilitate the process of their total elimination. So it could be asked, why am I talking about commitments made in 2000 and 2010? Don't we live in a different world now? My answer would be the disarmament obligation of the NPT and international law general remains as important as ever, and those commitments are integral to implementation of that obligation. The aim should be, and U.S. representative at the 2025 meeting of the NPT preparing for the 2026 review conference made remarks consistent with what I'm about to say. The aim should be that the United States and other nuclear armed states, in particular Russia and China, in accordance with Article 6, take a negotiated path to the global elimination of nuclear weapons in the foreseeable future. To be successful, that path will likely involve limits on missile defenses and non-nuclear strategic forces. I will close by stating a core tenet of my organization, my own beliefs. Respect for the international rule of law is an indispensable tool for avoiding nuclear catastrophe and ending the nuclear age. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Burroughs. That was a great note on which to end, reminding us all of our obligations that have been in place for decades now, and which we unfortunately seem to be sliding away from and need to be reminded and jerked back to the reality of what the obligations are. And on the note of the optimism of Mallory and others on the panel before us, it's no reason we can't do it. It's a matter of will and leadership and deciding that we shall do it. It's a big lift. I think we all know that, but you've reminded us what's at the core of it, what we were able to come together and agree to at one point in time. And there's a need to get back to that, no matter how we manage to do it. And the last panel had some ideas of trying to draw the communities that work on these issues together to get to the kind of leadership, or at least a constrained runaway leadership, to move us back in that direction. So thank you very, very much for your remarks. I want to thank all of our speakers here today, Dr. Burroughs, Congressman Beyer, our moderators, Matthew Gault and Laicie Heeley, our panelists, right down the line. They were just tremendous and had so many good ideas and thoughts to share with us, and they were provoking, and they were intelligent, and they were reminders that we have such good people in this field who contribute to it every day and help us out, and who we want to keep hearing from and stay active and work with them. We appreciate all of them. I also want to appreciate the staff here at the center for the work that they've done. Emma Stanford, our leader and program coordinator on this effort, a terrific job, particularly having to move from an in-person deal to an online deal on that, and all the other leadership she showed. Anna Schumann and Farah Sonda putting together the communications, our tech team who worked with them and was so good at producing this and putting us on here today. John Erith, our senior policy director, plus Sean Rotzker and Connor Murray, our analyst on that. Everybody on staff participated, I think did a great job. And without patting ourselves on the back too much, they brought together a great array of people to present to us, and they should be proud of that, and I believe they are. Thank you to our sponsors, our lead sponsor, particularly the Carnegie Corporation of New York, who is always so generous in making sure we have the opportunity to provide policy analysis, education, and moving forward on this group. We hope that people stay in touch through our website, through our podcast, Nukes of Hazard, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, any way at all possible. We regret again that we weren't in person because the venue was shut down because of the government closeout, but we hope we have an opportunity before long to get this group together in person, encourage people to follow up to get their questions that might not have been asked answered, and to now go to the sort of faux reception that we were going to have had we been in person. Join Joe Cirincione in a glass of wine, if you will. Join Mallory Stewart in some soda or whatever it is, your libation of choice. But have a good evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for allowing us to do what we do and which we think is so very important, and join you in that. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Our gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. The show has ended. It's a great show. Thank you.